This week's Martha's Collection feature is an 1890s silk dress that had a few surprises with it. As found, it had one set of sleeves on it with lace trim, as you can see there, but it also had attached on the hanger the original sleeves that had been removed from the dress at some point. And you can see here that the sleeves are quite large, and this puts it at the 1890s. They called this type of sleeve a Lego mutton sleeve as they resembled a leg of lamb. There's so much more I will get into on this dress, but first I wanted to share a story. I was not able to find any information at first on this company, Allebone, but I finally found a newspaper article dated Tuesday, March 10th, 1892 from the Chicago Tribune. The article discusses that Mrs. Allebone was traveling from Europe, landing in New York by ship, and she was with 3 other women, and on the ship they had a total of 7 trunks. Well, a customs officer was a little suspicious of their claim to not have anything dutiable, and here is part of that article. Quote, "When Colonel Story asked Miss Allebone what her name was and where she was bound, she innocently answered in French accent she did not know where she was going. 'Oh, yes, you do,' said the customs officer quietly. 'Your name is Allebone, and you are going to 1551 Michigan Avenue, Chicago.' The woman was dumbfounded and made no further attempt to conceal her identity." Unquote. The article goes on to say that the women had a total of 7 trunks, and in it they tried to hide hats, bonnets, lace, 45 pairs of kid leather gloves, which they tried to hide inside dirty stockings and crowns of hats. They even tried sewing old ratty lace onto the skirts of new dresses to try to make them look old. Well, they didn't get away with it, but eventually they paid the fees and did get the items back. That story ran in the paper with a few more days after that, kind of going over more of the details, but it must have been quite the story at the time. And I think she had tried doing trying to get away without paying the customs fee that the fall previous, and that's why they were kind of onto her and looking out for that. But anyway, I just thought that was such an interesting story, and to learn a little bit about the label behind this dress. So the dress itself is actually in quite good condition. This back skirt here needs to be repaired, but the saddest thing is that mice, unfortunately, which did happen with other pieces in this collection, chewed through the back of the skirt. There's 2 rather sizable holes and then another smaller one. So that I will address shortly. Of course, there's no perfect fix for that, but I try to make it look at least your eye isn't going to go to that dark hole of a spot in those holes. But first, to repair that cartridge pleat in the skirt, I'm kind of doing a rebasting through the center of that, as was done originally. And I'm not sure if this waist was released at some point to try to make it look larger, or if it just kind of fell apart. But I did have some lace from which is ironically about 100 years later. The silk was left over from my wedding dress that I made for my wedding in 1996. It matched rather well. So I used a bit of that to repair the missing part of the waistband and stitch that into place. And then I will use it later also for the patching of those holes. So with these cartridge pleats, each one of those little folds gets stitched by hand onto the waistband. And it's not as beautiful of a job that was done originally to the skirt, but it definitely is usable now. So here I'm taking that silk. Again, it was from my wedding dress, and it's a pot de soie, which is what I believe the silk on the dress is. And there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing this, but this is how I ended up doing it on this dress. And it ended up being a bit more work, but I'll explain in a bit of why I chose to do it this way. So the first step is you're taking a patch of material, which I did a circular shape, and you're making it larger, of course, than the hole. And I'm doing a hand stitch, of course, encasing the entire hole and going around it. And then after that's done, you can see there that I did encase that hole. And that's what it looks like when it's finished. So then what you're doing is you're going to cut out that center portion, and you're going to leave, about 1/8 of an inch of a seam allowance in the inside. And then you're going to clip that curved seam because that is going to allow it to lay better, lay more flat once you turn this inside out. And you'll see that here. So that you're putting that to the inside. This is also kind of a way how you make bound buttonholes. So once that's done, then you're going to press it. So in the past, if it's a regular thin material, I have just put another fabric on the back side of it underneath it and then just hand stitch that in place. Well, this was so much more thicker. There's 3 layers of material at this point in the skirt. So that I didn't have that kind of dark shadow from it being recessed, I decided to figure out a way to perfectly match a patch to that hole. So I traced it on tissue paper and then took some cardstock, and then so I'm shaping this patch to fit inside the hole so that it's not going to be recessed, so that it's going to be flush with the satin. Again, there's no perfect way to do this so that you're not going to see this hole, but you can see there that your eye is not going towards the dark hole. So I just felt this wasn't a perfect solution, but I'm pleased with how it turned out. And this fabric was not very easy to get the wrinkles out of. I tried steaming and that was not that effective. So then I did use a pressing cloth that had been misted with water. So onto those sleeves, the original sleeves, I was so curious. I really wanted to see how it would have looked originally on the dress. So I did not stitch them on to the dress, but I just stitched them together and then kind of tacked them on the dress. And look at that. I just think that is so fun that these original sleeves were still retained with the dress. Now here is to go over some of the incredible details. Look at the trim alone on the end of those sleeves is just gorgeous. And it's kind of hard to show in this photo or this video, is a metallic fabric. So it has kind of almost tarnished, and there's a good shot of that beautiful trim, and you get a glimpse of that metallic thread that is woven in that fabric. And the original designer of this took that scallop motif from the fabric that was used on the sleeves, and they cut every single one of those little scallops out, and then they stitched it onto the hem. Each one of those is stitched on by hand, and then that kind of twisted silk satin ribbon above that, the whole trim itself is stitched together by hand and then stitched on by hand. Just incredible amount of handwork on this. And then, of course, the underlayer has that taffeta scallop pink edge ruffle, again, hand-stitched on there and gathered. That helps give it a little bit of body. And the skirt does have a train, so it would have given it some support for that train. Just incredible. And now for the bodice, again, look at those beautiful little tiny hand stitches. And it's 2 different layers of fastening. There's a front for the underlayer of hook and eyes. And here is that Allebone waist stay on some Petersham ribbon. The inner upper silk on this has not fared well. That has shattered. And look at it has a stitched in upper left bust pad. This was part of the ideal shaping that was wanted for a bodice at that time. I just think this, again, these garments with the amount of handwork that went into these is absolutely incredible to me. It's so fun to have seen the original sleeves with the dress and then also how it would have later been updated 130 years later. It's still a treasure.